Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. We weren't really sure exactly how paid tickets was going to go, and I'm glad to see a great turnout this evening. Thank you, everyone, for coming. So good evening. My name is Allie Platt. I'm a board member with Building a Better Bend. We're really excited to be here with you this evening and bring in a wonderful speaker tonight. Building a Better Bend is a nonprofit organization that was founded nearly 20 years ago with the mission of bringing expert speakers to share their experiences in ways to positively impact the quality of life in Bend. Many of my fellow board members are here this evening. I'd like to ask them to stand up, maybe wave if they're already standing, so that you all can give a round of applause for this great set of volunteers that bring these lecture series to us each year. I would also like to take a moment to thank elected officials and appointed officials that are here with us this evening. I saw a few of them in the room. If you could also stand up so that everyone can say hi. Thank you, Councilor Mike Riley, Gina, Councilor Franzosa is in the background. Miss Scott standing up, but I know Scott's here somewhere as well. Our annual lecture series would not be possible without the support of our sponsors. Tonight's presenting sponsor is Killian Pacific. Killian Pacific is a Pacific Northwest-based real estate firm dedicated to creating vibrant, sustainable communities through thoughtful placemaking and human-centered design. Killian Pacific has thoughtfully delivered positive, meaningful, and lasting places throughout the Northwest for over 50 years. And locally, many of you are probably aware of Killian Pacific's redevelopment of the Box Factory, which has now become one of Bend's most cherished locations. Killian Pacific could not make it tonight. However, they're honored to support this important conversation in Bend, as it aligns very closely with their latest project, the Jackstraw. The Jackstraw is a mixed-use development intentionally designed to enhance community connectivity and reflect Bend's distinctive lifestyle. I think we've all seen the development underway. It's planned to open in fall of 2025. A key feature of the Jackstraw project will be a shared street concept in a prominent community plaza. And in fact, Cascadia Partners, my coworker at Cascadia Partners, Director of Urban Design Martin, helped bring this street concept, which will be modeled off of a Dutch woonhuis, or living street, to Bend. And this brings me to announcing some of our supporting sponsors, Brooks Resources and Cascadia Partners. Thank you to both of these wonderful organizations for their support in making this lecture series possible. Additionally, we have a delightfully long list of partner sponsors this year, including Project, Walker Macy, Echo Northwest, Dowell, Kittleson and Associates, Kelcon, Sunwest Builders, I'm only halfway through the list, folks, Ashley and Vance Engineering, Hand in Hand Productions, Stemich Design and Architecture, 10 Over Studios, and LRS Architects. Thank you all so much for your wonderful support. And now, to introduce tonight's topic and speaker. And let me actually just do quick kind of logistics. There are restrooms kind of through this door right here if you do need to use the restroom, especially for anyone that's close to being as pregnant as I am. I know there's at least one person that's close in the room. You can also continue to get drinks throughout the lecture. Again, for anyone that is less pregnant than me, that is an option available for you. Okay, now to introduce tonight's topic and speaker. Ellen Dunham-Jones is a leading urbanist, the director of the Urban Design Master's Program at Georgia Tech, located in Atlanta, and co-author of the Retrofitting Suburbia book series, which documents successful retrofits of aging box stores, malls, and office parks into healthier and more sustainable places. Ellen serves on several national boards and committees, is former chair of the Board of Congress for New Urbanism, and previously taught at University of Virginia and MIT. Ellen's latest book, Case Studies for Retrofitting Suburbia, examines how retrofits are helping communities disrupt automobile dependence, improve public health, support an aging population, and leverage social capital for equity, all while supporting climate and energy resilience. As many of you are aware, the City of Bend is about to embark upon a 2 to 3 year process to update its growth plan. This will require the city to meet new state planning requirements, often referred to as climate and equitable community rules or climate-friendly areas. And this will require all of us as a community to reimagine aging strip malls and empty big box stores into a new network of vibrant, walkable, mixed-use mini downtowns where we can all shop, gather, and play. For example, what happens to the old Costco site on the east side? At 12 acres, the old Costco site is about the exact same size of downtown Bend. You can see within 12 acres in downtown Bend, we fit over 200 shops and restaurants. On the next slide, the former Costco site housed one employer, one job location, and it's currently sitting vacant and unused. Ellen's teachings and research focus on helping communities address new challenges that they were never designed for. She has a unique database of over 2,500 suburban retrofit examples and case studies. Tonight, she will share inspiring examples and lessons learned to help our growing community as we explore opportunities to retrofit Bend for a livable future. Please welcome me in joining Ellen.
All right. Thank you so much, Allie, and thanks to all of you for coming. I love sharing all of my retrofits, and I promise I won't show you all 2,500, but it might feel that way. So come grab a seat. There's still a few here, and actually we can easily take these stools over, and we'll go ahead and get started. And I think, actually, Allie, I'm going to change the title to your title. I liked it more than mine here. But this is the latest book, and I am going to mostly kind of talk from some of just showing case studies, because I think it's so important. But I will start with a little bit of definitions. What is suburbia? I could care less about the municipal designation or whether the Census Bureau considers an area a city or a suburb. I am trained as an architect. I teach urban design. And really, I care about the form. There are plenty of cities that actually have quite a bit of suburban form inside their boundaries that I think should be retrofitted. And yet there are also plenty of older suburbs that have, a couple of blocks of pretty good urban form that, in my opinion, should be expanded on and preserved. So these slides just kind of go through real 101, overgeneralized, but, post-war suburban form is boxes surrounded by flat-ish space that is mostly lawns or parking lots. The green space is just the background. It's the object buildings that are the only things our eyes focus on, the private space. The streets are tree-like networks. Think of the highway as the trunk, the arterials are the branches, and the twigs are all the little cul-de-sacs. Urban form, and we all kind of know this, but boxes front sidewalks. If there is parking, it is either behind or under. The green spaces are foregrounded as figural public spaces shaped by the fronts of buildings, enclosed. They become these great public gathering spaces. The street networks form small-ish walkable blocks, often gridded, sometimes a cranky grid, whatever. So that really what I'm interested in is how do we retrofit that stuff into something vaguely, somewhat resembling more the urban form. So what's driving the retrofitting of suburbia, I'm not going to read all of this, but essentially across the country and really across many countries now, we just have a slew of underperforming commercial properties and infrastructure. All that stuff that we built post-war, it's getting old. And especially the retail and the commercial buildings. They were never built to last. And now it's also the infrastructure that serves them. The suburban roads, the pipes, the wires are aging, and frankly, the taxes generated by low-density development don't even come close to covering the cost of even more than just, barely covering the cost of basic maintenance, but actual replacement or improvement, which we're hitting. The average lifespan of a road, a pipe, a wire, it varies enormously, but it's about 60, 70 years. How old is a lot of our stuff? 60, 70 years. A lot of communities are finding that it's not only legislation like the CFAs that you guys have to do this. A lot of communities are finding we love our suburban style, lifestyle. We don't really want to be urban, but we can't afford not. We need the tax revenue from some more densification to simply maintain enough of our infrastructure. Climate change. The suburbs were never designed for climate change. The word sustainability didn't even really exist. It wasn't something people talked about. Demographics are changing dramatically. We are projected by 2034, we will have more older adults than children, which is just an interesting statistic. The suburbs were designed around the assumption is that it's mostly young families starting out. That's not who lives there anymore. It's the aging boomers, predominantly, who've lived there all their lives. They're still there. The kids have long since left. The kids are, some of them are trying to move back in, and they can't afford it. So we also now, though, the majority of US households are one or two persons. We household size keeps shrinking. Do we really need all these single-family homes when the majority of our households are one or two persons? A lot of those households say no. And then another statistic that doesn't get very much, hasn't gotten a lot of into the public imagination. Since 2005, more Americans in poverty have been living in suburbs than living in cities. And the suburbanization of poverty is another absolutely essential reason why that is driving the need to retrofit some of the suburbs. Part of that also is that we have a shrinking middle class. And the suburbs were the engine that fueled the American middle class. That's not the case now. Right now, we have more really rich suburbs and really poor suburbs. And just as we don't have as many households that are middle class, we don't have as many middle class suburbs anymore. And so the market demand for more rentals, multifamily, missing middle, other more affordable house types is absolutely where what a lot of this is adding up to. COVID and work from home have also led to a lot of shifts. Telework, teleshopping, teleeducation, telemedicine is changing how and where people live. Bend is a Zoom town. You guys live this. All of which kind of comes down to a tremendous new market preferences. Walkable urbanism now commands an 85% rent premium over drivable suburbanism nationwide on average. It varies significantly. In many markets, it's 120% rent premium, but nationwide, it's an 85% rent premium. So vibrant public parks, great main streets, are attracting both the folks that are working online when they want a break, they want to have access to nature, and to people, and to feeling part of a community. So all of these things are sort of driving the retrofitting of suburbia. And so my co-author, June Williamson, and I, in our most recent book, identified, as Ali described, these 6 urgent challenges suburbia was never designed for. And affordability really is isn't mentioned, but is kind of looming over all of it. And so you'll hear me use the word retrofits that just applies broadly to a lot of different ways and kinds and different ways of dealing with these different challenges. But I'll also just use the words redevelopment, reinhabitation, and regreening, because those are really, to be very simple, the 3 basic strategies as an urban design strategy of what do we do with all of these sort of underperforming properties. So how do these relate to Bend? You guys know better than I do, how Bend is going to and can try to accommodate growth. Will it happen within the urban growth boundary? And will that happen because of now the allowing the one-time expansion if 30% of units are affordable? How are you going to meet the climate-friendly area requirements? How are you going to provide housing for all, not just the wealthy? I think we're obviously missing middle housing is one, and that's the duplexes, the triplexes, the quads, the cottage courts, the sort of smaller low-rise apartment buildings. So you guys have, I think, an incredibly great set of regulations to guide your growth. My job is just to show you as many case studies as I can squeeze in in the time allowed, to try to just spark your imagination. I never know which one will resonate with which person. Like, yeah, I want that in my neighborhood. So, job 1 is disrupt auto dependence. Basically, if you don't fix this, you won't fix any of the other challenges. Every single other of those challenges is exacerbated too much by not reducing, our dependence on the car. Bunch of statistics here. I mean, simple things. It is amazing that over half of trips in the U.S. are 3 miles or less. That could be an easy bike ride for not everybody, but for a lot of people if we simply had bike lanes and sidewalks, if the streets were safe enough for it. Typical suburban house generates 9.4 trips per day. That's actually gone down slightly because there's been such an increase in deliveries. And yet 75% of residential land in American cities is zoned exclusively for single-family detached buildings. So we're just a real mismatch between the household demographics, between the kinds of trips we're taking, and what we could be. In blue are just a series of the strategies of how do we reduce dependence on the car, make things more walkable, allow a mix of uses so that people have places within walking distance of where they live, multimodal systems and trails, on-demand microtransit. You guys had a great microtransit, Ride Bend. Gosh, I hope that comes back. Road diets, I'll talk about those. Walkable street networks, more and better intersections. And and just plain, number 1, build on the parking lots. And if need be, if you have to design, if the market's not quite ready, if you have to add parking lots, design them as future building sites. Put the sewers not diagonally underneath it to the closest hookup. Put them in the drive lanes of the future street that is going to be dividing your parking lot. It's not rocket science, and people are doing it in a lot of places. So a typical kind of retrofit, a redevelopment these days, this is a fairly early one. This is Belmar in Lakewood, Colorado, 6 miles outside of Denver. It was a 100-acre shop, big mall. I think that's probably on, laser isn't working, but Black Friday, the first year it opened. Today, it is 22 blocks of public streets and a mix of uses, mix of housing types. It's generating 4 times the property tax revenue of the tax revenue, period, of the mall at its peak. They did not have to they didn't have to widen any roads around it or add extra turn lanes or anything, because the mix of uses means that it's actually so many internal trips are happening. This is not generating 9.4 trips. About approximately 40% of trips are just now walk right 2 blocks from your house trips. It's a tremendous increase in on-site property values, little clever things. This is the parking garage for the cinema, but they took 1 car depth and made artist studios at the ground floor to walk by. Nice. They did have a bit of a problem. The bars and restaurants are killing it because the area around it is mostly retirees. Suburbanites have always loved their suburb. They incorporated because they didn't want to be annexed by Denver, but now they have their downtown. And so at lunchtime, the restaurants, it's comfort food, music's kind of quiet, gentle, and it's populated by folks coming from about a 3-mile radius. At 5 o'clock, the music goes up. It's cocktail time, and it's the hipsters coming on out. And the bars and restaurants can completely adjust to different demographic groups as they wish. The retailers are like, I don't know, do I set up a garden supply store or a hipster boutique? And they went bankrupt. The retail actually went bankrupt. It was immediately bought up, kind of waiting to see. It seems to be doing fine right now. But so, it's not all a bed of roses as these go ahead. So this was the second dead mall to downtown project in the U.S. There are 120 of these that are substantially completed in the U.S. right now. There are another over 600 that want to be this kind of a mixed-use redevelopment. There are about another 85 that are substantially in progress, and then there's a bunch of just wannabes. They're probably not going to get the financing for a variety of reasons. It's not advanced. Slide is not advancing. I'm not sure why. Help? All right. So that was sort of a typical of one kind of the redevelopment of dead malls. This is one of the most ambitious projects, I think, in the U.S. right now as a suburban retrofit that I am really very, very excited about. This is called the Pike District. It's about a half-hour drive or train rail ride outside of Washington, D.C. in North Bethesda, Maryland. So this is about 400 acres. This is about 30. And this is this 30-acre strip mall that in 2018 looked like this. It today has now a new 17-story office building that opened just last year in the middle of work from home. Nothing, nobody's building new office right now, and they have a 0.02% vacancy rate because they built a great place. No problem bringing in office when you have a great place with great amenities. This happened because the county was looking at this area. Rockville Pike is the main, this 8-lane, 10 with the turn lanes, highway that runs through, that is just lined with sort of sprawling stuff. It has some tall buildings, but it's very suburban and sprawling. But it does have a rail line that runs right parallel. So there's metro stops right there. And the county approached the 6 major property holders and said, we want to do a new sector plan to make this a more walkable area. And are you supportive? The property owners all owned property in more walkable parts of DC and were like, hell yeah, I make twice as much money rents on the walkable, but I'm not going to make my parcel walkable unless I know my neighbor is going to do it, because what good does it do me? So the 6 agreed and said, let us take a first stab at it. They hired a really good transportation planning firm, Georgia Tech alums, who came up with this plan where every one of those dotted lines is a new public street being constructed on private land, and the property owners are paying about a 10% extra extra tax to help support that. You'd think they're crazy. Why would the developers agree to do that? And it is because they know that having it a more walkable area absolutely meets the market so much better. And to have it at an area with a transit stop, yes, they are all in. The county now, so I said that's the first piece. And the county is, you're not allowed to build until the streets are in. So there's a really strict phasing, but they're doing a fantastic job. Even the roofs, you see a lot of solar, a lot of green roofs. That's actually a community farm. The ground floors, really fine-grained, highly walkable retail, lots of green infrastructure that's actually going down to the silva cells, draining the water. Very high performance, doing fantastic. So that's just that first piece. And this is just phase 1. They're doing this for 4 miles. Now that will take a long time. But this is converting a sprawling area for 4 miles into a 4-mile corridor city. And they're allowing the new buildings to go up to 30 stories right along the highway. So this is a really ambitious project, but it's happening. And there's depends what part they're in, but 12 or 25% affordable housing required. Now, not everybody has the rail transit. So in another part of the DC market, this one is going back even older than the previous one, but in the early 2000s, the county, Arlington County, wanted to see if they could if they could bring in the high density in order to generate the taxes to support transit along the corridor instead of the other way around. So they hired Dover Cole, great firm, designed 4 nodes that where the transit stops would be along a corridor that was just all kind of strip malls, some of my husband's favorite thrift stores, he misses terribly now, but and a few high-rise 1960s apartment buildings, so they had some high-rise, but they designed it with a form-based code that said, along Columbia Pike, this main corridor, you could build up to 12 stories, but at the residential one street back, you could not be more than 3. So you get a more reasonable connection. Then they also promised the developers, they said, now if you give us a project that exactly meets the form-based code, we promise permitting in 6 months. And in the middle of the 2009 Great Crisis, 6 projects went ahead on a corridor that had not seen any new development in 30 years. So it just completely kick-started. Unfortunately, there was a change in government. The fears of gentrification at the speed with which this was redeveloping, suddenly rents were going up so much that the city council voted against the transit because they said the transit's causing too much gentrification. Instead, they're going with now bus rapid transit, building 23 bus stations along. But so they are getting more of the transit than they wanted, but just not quite what they initially thought. These things evolve. Other corridors closer to home here, and the developers have long said they'll invest at a rail stop because the rail won't move. But buses, they can get rerouted. I can't count on bus as sort of delivering enough of that kind of extra market demand and boost. But bus rapid transit stations now have been sort of the question, will developers really invest at bus rapid transit? Shoreline, Washington has proven that they will. So they had a typical, what we refer to as the monstrous hybrid. This is a strode. Do you know the difference between a street and a road? Anyone? Think country road. A road connects, its job is mobility, to get you from point A to point B as fast as you can through the countryside. A street, think city street. A street's job is to provide access for commerce to houses, to businesses. A street is supposed to be slow and safe and encouraging interaction and access. Unfortunately, a lot of country roads were rezoned for commercial, and in suburbia, we got the hybrid, the strode, that provides neither mobility nor access very well at all. So they did a retrofit. They had the highest crash rate. They didn't even have sidewalks. They just had a stripe on the road saying that's the sidewalk. So they put the median in the middle. They put, instead of the buses down the middle, I didn't even mention in Rockville Pike, that's also, they're going to do a road diet. Once they get all the street network in, then they're putting Rockville Pike down from 8 lanes to 6 with buses down the middle. In this one, they decided to put the buses on the side so that it's easier for pedestrians to access them. But they call them business access lanes because these cars are allowed to use the access lane only when they're accessing a business. Otherwise, it's a dedicated lane for the bus. And they also built, there's a new bike trail, and they built that over that. So, and that has triggered now massive new development. Shoreline Place, former Sears, mostly a standalone big Sears, but with also some more retail and tons of parking, is now being redeveloped and has already built the first phase, just starting now the second phase, where the bikes meet the bus. So road diets can also, they can be massive, they can also be gentler. This is a road diet in Lancaster, California. It's about 2 hours in Antelope Valley, 2 hours from Los Angeles. Their main street, whoops, I keep hitting that. I talk with my hands from New Jersey. It's just what we do. So this was their main street, your typical 5-lane. Recognize it in Bend? I think I've seen a few of these. So the turn lane. Their main street was dying. They were losing businesses to the mall, a couple antique shops. And they said, well, we'll widen it to make it easier for folks to get downtown. No, it just made it easier for people to zoom through downtown. And it was posted at 40 an hour, and people were going 50. Then they put it on a road diet, reduced it to 2 lanes, parking in the middle, in between street trees and street lights. Oh, and by the way, they put the speed limit down to 20, and they got rid of 9 traffic lights, 9 blocks. So you'd think this could be a disaster. They went from 5 lanes posted at 40 to 2 at 20, and no traffic lights. But when you think about it, at 40 miles an hour, cars need to be pretty far apart from each other. At 20, they can actually snug up pretty close. You actually get more throughput when the cars are going 20 miles an hour. And at 20 miles an hour, if a car hits a pedestrian, chances are the pedestrian lives. That's the threshold. Unless it's a big, tall SUV or a pickup truck. Hits you in the chest. So then getting rid of the traffic lights meant people actually make eye contact. They've seen a 50% cut in traffic collisions just in the first 2 years. I mean, 10% increase in downtown property values, 50 new businesses. I went there, I interviewed a couple shop owners, and one was telling me, oh, the mall keeps calling me, they want me back, the mall down the road in the next town. No, this is where I want to be. I mean, they made a place. They made a distinctive, true downtown. This center becomes their parade route. It becomes their farmers market when they need that celebrations. And they didn't change curb and gutter. This was actually pretty darn cheap to do. They put in permeable paving and light color to reduce the urban heat island effects. It's a really, really great project. And for a town who, I kid you not, in TripAdvisor, the one thing they say to visit in Lancaster is there's a highway on the edge of town that has rumble strips cut in that if you drive at exactly 55 miles an hour, it plays the William Tell Overture. That's how much this town loves their cars. But they have absolutely, this is a Republican, very hardcore Republican community. They have totally bought in. This bought their mayor so much goodwill. He now also made this the first community in the U.S. requiring every single new home to be solar ready. So strange things happen with retrofits. Now, Carmel, Indiana is a hotbed of suburban retrofitting, also with a Republican mayor. And so Carmel did a number of things. So I mentioned the getting rid of the street lights. Do you know how much it costs to replace street lights at an intersection? It's about $250,000 per intersection. So one day the mayor is in there and his civil engineers go, Mr. Mayor, we got to start planning for some of our intersections. We got to replace all the signals. And the mayor, he loved Europe, and he was trying to basically remake his town as Europe as much as he could. And he said, all right, we're just going to get rid of the streetlights. We're putting in roundabouts. We'll never have to replace another streetlight. And he did. Over about 180 of them now, actually. That's out of almost all of them. What that also meant was all their 5 lanes became 4s. You don't need the turn lane. All their 3s became 2s. They put in off-road multi-use paths in that extra right-of-way. They have 200 miles of bike lanes, bike trails and lanes in a town that's not that big. So really pretty phenomenal, just again, in terms of rethinking use. I've seen quite a few roundabouts. I wouldn't recommend roundabouts in a downtown, but in the more suburban areas, it's reduced injuries, reduced idling, it's reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and folks are actually getting through town faster now that it's all roundabouts. The other thing this mayor did, when he first was elected in the 90s, he would ask folks, where's downtown? Oh, yeah, we don't have one. So he built one. And he used tax increment financing, and it's the only town I know of that did this, where he used the TIF to pay for underground parking. And that meant that even little sites, just a 1 acre site, or something, if he put in the parking, then the developer could completely build it out with housing at actually a good 5-6 stories. And then the tax revenue, that little 1 acre goes from $34,000 a year to almost $1 million. He pays off the TIF in 5 years, not 25. And he did this throughout his town. He has built a new downtown, a midtown, and a really fabulous area along a big bike trail. So there's economic reasons also to think about these things. Trails are, you guys are trail central, but I really haven't seen much trail-oriented development. Trails are amazing to go hiking in, but they can also be a really great commute ride. They can be a great, just right outside your front door. In Atlanta, we have a Rails to Trails that has made a 22-mile loop around the city. That is now our lakefront property. This office building is getting $75 a square foot. That's Manhattan rents. New buildings are popping up along the Beltline. This one, designed by Olson Kundig, Seattle firm, that was MailChimp, had started off in this renovated, really wonderful former Sears warehouse, 800 employees, but they'd outgrown the space. They surveyed them. 30% of, this is a pretty high-tech company, 30% were walking or biking to work along the Beltline and said, we'll quit if you move. So they built a new headquarters just down the way. We are getting the best quality architecture we've seen in our city in the last almost 100 years along the trails. The trails are, it's not just for nature. Parts of it are for nature, but parts of it are really awesome development. Now those are big buildings. If you really get successful at reducing car dependence, you get rid of cars. You design car-free development, and you get to build an entirely new kind of dimensions of buildings. This is cul-de-sac, ironically named, in Tempe, Arizona. It is at a train station. This is out in the suburbs of Tempe. This was sort of a former low-rise, one-story industrial general stuff, 16 acres, and it's an entirely car-free rental community. It does have a little bit of parking at the grocery store, and there's some bars and a little bit of convenience amenities there. The whole thing is designed essentially into little courtyards, fully shaded. I was out there at 4 o'clock and took that picture, fully shaded courtyards. And it's designed, if you want to make people walking and biking, you really pay attention to the microclimate. You've got to make it shaded and comfortable. So everything is cranky. It feels medieval. It is, and every building, 16 feet wide. Cross ventilation, every room. The circulation is, these are little 3-story, missing middle, little 3-story, 3-unit kind of project. The stairs are on the outside. Incredibly social. You can kind of see the scale here versus single-family house versus big box. And then these little guys. Change. It's exciting. And it's been doing extremely, extremely well. We can go even further with the idea of car-free. Peter Calthorpe has helped lobby successfully the state of California to now allow infill affordable housing by right on commercial properties and commercial corridors. And he's mapped out for the Bay Area how you could completely, on all of those arterials, begin to replace the low density, aging, fading, underperforming commercial property with housing. And because it's right along the corridors, put in transit, ideally autonomous little shuttle buses, so that all of that housing could be built with no parking, keeping it even more affordable. And this is now legal. This is now starting. So that's the first challenge, reducing car dependency. Job 1. Leveraging social capital for equity is also incredibly important. We need to redevelop and always include a lot of affordable housing. We need to re-inhabit some of those big existing big boxes with social infrastructure anchors and preserve at-risk low-income housing and jobs. And we need to re-green a lot of that asphalt to encourage social gathering. So sometimes it can be just simple, little, modest things. I love this example in Fayetteville, Arkansas. This was a grocery store along one of their main streets. And oh, what a nice way of fronting the street. Blank facade and a chain link fence. Then a co-op moved in, took it over, and in the middle of COVID, made it into a beach with hammocks. Not exactly regreening, but yeah, it's permeable, right off the coffee shop. I mean, just simple little social things make such a difference. Sometimes also, here, in Lake Oswego, not so far away, a basic, L-shaped strip mall that was originally designed purely for convenience. They're called convenient, ULI calls strip centers convenience centers. You get your groceries, your pharmacy, the bank, and maybe you treat yourself at Starbucks. But increasingly, as we have smaller and smaller households, families are eating out more and more. So they turned it into a more social space by cutting 2 slots through an L, part of the L, making those lined with wood, these warm, inviting, great hangout spots. And suddenly now, and then in the back, the old loading dock is still there, but now it becomes also a new front to the neighborhood. They've had to add a whole lot more bike racks, and folks are walking and biking to the neighborhood now in ways they never did before. And it's become a third place. If home is the first place, work is the second place, the third place is where you go to simply build community and to be and where the hierarchies of the first and second no longer apply. Very important rule of third places. Burien Town Square up in Washington, when they became a city, they identified a sort of underperforming chunk of asphalt and older buildings. The first thing they did was put a road diet in front, and then they built a park and put in a smaller street grid to make smaller blocks. They had a few, they hit the Great Recession, that knocked them down a little bit, but it is completely, they've stuck to the vision and is now a very successful, active downtown, on just a small parcel, 10 acres. This one in Wyandanch, Long Island, is also sort of making a new town center in a community that has been neglected and ignored for decades. This is, Wyandanch was the one community on Long Island where Black people were allowed to live and own a home, but it never had sewers. It never got any love. Took a long time to pile together a whole lot of the capital stack on this project. Goes on for pages. But they have now a town green, affordable housing, renovated their train station to give them better access to jobs, and hired almost all local workers to do the construction. And this kind of transitions into the equity position of thinking about the low wage workers. DeSoto, Texas, they had a dead Ace hardware store in a strip mall, and the mayor asked one of the local developers, Walmart kind of is maybe interested in just coming in and demolishing the whole thing. I don't know, can't we already have 2 Walmarts. Do we really need a third? Can't we do better? And so Monty Anderson said, the developer said, yeah, okay, I will set up a business incubator because this community really needs to learn how to be entrepreneurs. But you guys have to be the mentors and coach them. So the city holds the annual pitch night, and the city actually instructs folks on how to actually start a business and be successful. And Monty took out a row of parking to bring in the food trucks and the picnic tables. He hopes to build some housing in there eventually. But just, the simple, small scale, great little projects. At a bigger scale, to also help build social equity, little could be more important than education. So this is a dead mall in Austin, the Highland Mall, that was bought by Austin Community College. They actually read about a similar retrofit in Vancouver that was in our first book. So the entire mall now has been renovated and occupied by the community college, but they partnered with a developer to build housing and office on top of the parking lots surrounding it. And then they also have replanted some of the significant greens and are celebrating the home of a former slave encampment in the back. Oh, and they got transit that they didn't have before. So, this one is a project that you get the redevelopment to connect us to the future, the re-inhabitation to really address contemporary issues, the present, and then also the regreening to connect us to the past. And the developer, with the office leases, when he can, and he said he's usually successful, is he asks them in their lease to commit to hiring a certain number of the community college students as interns. So really pushing the jobs and careers. Another example at a much smaller level of using education, this woman in this picture, Margie Stagmeyer, is just one of my heroes in Atlanta. She is a landlord of aging, older, really old, the bottom of the market apartment complexes. The housing of last resort, often moldy, often unhealthy, and she makes improvements to them because it is the housing of last resort. In Fulton County, we lost 9,000 garden apartment units, 2008 to 2016. We sure as hell didn't build that many. So what she's been doing is she knows her tenants. Most of her tenants are single women with single moms with a bunch of kids. They're working $10 an hour jobs at the airport. If a kid gets sick, they miss a shift, they lose their job, they're evicted, they go to the next. There's 30 of these apartment complexes, and there's a constant churning wheel around them. The kids lose, on average, 3 months of school every time mom moves. And then those schools all become the worst performing schools in the area. Margie, at one point, took over 1 unit of a 300-unit apartment complex and put in an after-school program. The local officials actually fought her. They just wanted to tear it down. She went ahead, did it. That school, within 5 years, made Georgia's best performing, best improvement list. She now, instead of having on average about 30% of the units empty at any time because of this constant churn, she's full. She doesn't have to raise rents. She's now preaching to other landlords, don't raise your rents, make slight improvements, add, especially in education, partner with the local elementary school and raise all the boats. And it's just an amazing story of what she's been doing. So while I'm an architect and an urbanist, I can't love a garden apartment. It's not, but I love what she is doing. It is absolutely what we need a lot more of. I'm starting to see more and more examples of work on-site or near-site workforce housing as the only way to help. Generally it's the lowest wage workers who have to commute the furthest out of town, who can least afford the cost of all that. This happens to show a daycare center in Connecticut that realized they couldn't afford to pay their daycare caretakers what the caretakers really needed to be paid without raising the cost of daycare beyond what was already unsustainable for almost all their clients. So instead, they built them housing. So the caretaker workers now get housing as part of their job. Walmart's, in a few places, are considering this. Our transit agency in Atlanta is looking at, had my students work on some workforce housing at some of their sites. So it's another great way. This is another, I think, a really nice example of, this was a nonprofit that knew that transit was coming to Santa Ana, California. So they knew that gentrification and displacement was coming. They wanted to build some affordable housing, get ahead of it. And so they saw this little strip mall and said, oh, perfect, we'll build housing there. But they did a lot of community engagement, and the community members like, oh, no, that's our laundromat. Oh, no, we need that little mercado. Oh, we need, So they said, oh, okay, we'll get rid of the gas station. We're keeping all of the local retail, and then they built the housing. And really listening and working to the community in a lot of great ways. And this slide is on here for a bunch of other reasons, but mostly just to sort of show, even Walmart, you can connect affordable housing with affordable retail in a way that is absolutely urban. And a great example of that here in DC. Closer to home here in Milwaukee, Oregon, North Main Village. This one was done way back in the early 2000s, but this was a Safeway that had died and sat vacant for 10 years until the city was able to get, city and a developer were able to get both low-income housing tax credits for affordable housing and some TOD funding from Metro. The city acquired the land, and then they provided a 10-year partial tax abatement and reduced the system development charge reduction. And then that is in the project, is credited with anchoring the downtown's revival. It got a new public library as a neighbor. It's, even low-income housing can actually be absolutely transformative. And this one was a mix of, I think it's 64 of the LIHTC apartments, 37 owner-occupied townhomes, flats, and live-work units. So, missing middle is another, kind of a buzzword these days, but with good reason. Missing middle housing is a great way to incrementally densify existing neighborhoods and provide housing that is a better match for today's demographics. This is an example of a relatively affluent community, East Greenwich, Rhode Island. They knew they needed some affordable housing, so they picked the former auto body repair lot. The first proposal that came in was a big double-loaded corridor honker plopped down on the site. The neighbors freaked. They didn't particularly want affordable housing in their neighborhood, and they sure as hell didn't want that. Then they hired one of my students who gave them a cottage court that maintains the scale of the street very elegantly. This is 15 units on 1 acre. That's pretty dense, but no one complained at all. And it has a little stormwater catching court in the center. Really a great, and in particular, a lot of the missing middle housing, it wasn't designed as senior housing, but that's most of the folks who've moved in, folks who are downsizing, but want to stay in the neighborhood. This is a great example of missing middle infill in a residential neighborhood only about a mile from my house in Atlanta. This is a kind of fascinating story. So this and this, these were the only two existing properties. This was two fairly deep lots with very mature trees in the back. So both of the existing homes were converted to duplexes. Then 2 tall, skinny duplexes were also built on that lot. 4 accessory dwelling units built in between the trees in the back. And then 2 teeny tiny little guest houses. So it's like a 16 times more units without tearing down a single tree, did not require a single new variance. And the only thing it doesn't do is it doesn't provide parking. So on site. So any parking is on the street, but they did build a really righteous bike repair sort of setup, as well as the grill, shared communal grill. So I'm going to very quickly, those were really the 2 main topics, challenges I've been focusing on, but I want to really quickly just run through the rest of the challenges. Supporting an aging population. 17.4% of your population in Bend was over 65 by 2023. That's really kind of high. And now I understand that you're getting younger people moving in now. You're not just attracting the retirees, but all of us will get older. So it's still worth thinking about a lot of different ways to think about allowing people to try to age, at least in their neighborhood, if not in their same house. through missing middle, encouraging more social engagement kinds of places, integrating senior care and senior housing into walkable neighborhoods. One quick example, in Minnesota, a dead mall built on a wetland, been draining runoff, toxic runoff into the lake for decades, now is a senior housing anchored mixed-use town center. So it's integrating the seniors into the rest of this is their main street, with a town green that serves the community and the seniors. It's none of the, bermed off. This thing sold out before construction had barely started. There's an enormous market for this, but this is an expensive example of senior housing. Some more modest ways are generally reuse the existing buildings, re-inhabit. Here's a Days Inn motel that has become the Maple Hill Senior Living. And it happens to be across the street from a library and on the same block as a shopping mall, and that's kind of useful for folks. This was a little office building, parking court, turned into a garden court, and turned into co-housing, and almost all the residents are seniors. So another very important challenge is improving public health. I mean, for the last 100 years, the suburbs have been marketed as the healthy place to raise a family, while cities were seen as more, you're going to be prone to infectious diseases. Well, yeah, we did have that little COVID thing, but it's really today's chronic diseases are much more prevalent and the cause of death in our society, and it's suburbia's sedentary lifestyles that correlate. So really, human sprawl and suburban sprawl map right onto each other. So obesity, diabetes, heart disease, as well as suicide, car crashes, way higher in the suburbs. So lots we could and should be doing to improve health, safety, and welfare. A lot of that certainly having to do with what we do by reducing car dependency. But I will say, in Oregon in particular, there's just a whole lot of Kmarts that became health clinics. You guys in Minnesota, Oregon and Minnesota, right at the top on the conversions of Kmarts to health clinics, and schools, but mostly health clinics. So that's one really direct way to increase public health. I love this example in Northern Virginia. This is about 15 miles outside of DC, former Cinemaplex that has now been converted into a mixed-use town center, very specifically to combat the loneliness epidemic. And they've done this is owned by Eden, developed by Eden's, one of the country's largest grocery-anchored strip mall owners of those. New CEO absolutely said, loneliness epidemic, we got to try this mixed-use thing. So most of the buildings have very fine-grained retail and restaurants, tons of seating at the ground floor. This particular building then has 2 floors of parking, and then you get a Target. In the other buildings, it's the same thing, but you get the office. Or they build a new movie theater. You get the same thing. And then, so they put the small stuff at the bottom where the people are, and then the big stuff, you still get your big floor plate stuff as you need it. So to combat loneliness, they've got a 1-acre town green. It's just AstroTurf, but tons of stormwater stuff underneath it. And then the new movie theater, they put a big old LED screen that activates and programs this space all day long. Yoga classes in the morning, classes for parents and the kids in the mid-morning, lunchtime for office workers, after school programming, for kids, and then every local sports team, is played up there. It's it's not enough to just make a town green. You have to activate it. And every event they have, it does mean more sales in the restaurants and in the shops. And so, and then she also puts in, so seating everywhere, just everywhere. She wants you to linger. She's not trying to just force you into shops. She's trying to distract you to become a people watcher, maybe have a conversation with a stranger. She puts in edgy art, not too edgy, but edgy enough that she hopes people will have conversations, and keeps changing it, trying to see if anything she can do to encourage social interaction. And this one I just love this project. Had to show it. From Taiwan, a dead mall, been demolished. All that's left is the parking garage. But in the summer, to combat urban heat island, they turned it into a lagoon. You guys might need one of these. Competing for jobs. It's been really interesting, the dialogue kind of, the 80s, the 70s were the heyday of building suburban malls. The 80s were the heyday of building suburban office parks. Then cities came back. Then work from home kind of put all of it into question. But it's vibrant urbanism that is still what is the leading amenity for office, both to compete with and to augment work from home. So lots of different ways we need to compete, whether it's for higher wage office jobs or it's putting in more training, more incubators for the small businesses. This is another project in Austin, was a IBM big 300-acre office park. This was where the Selectric typewriter was designed and made, the high tech of its day. And in black are the streets of the old office park, wide, car-oriented. So that's where all the parking garages and parking lots have been placed. But then in red are all the new streets that they put in to break up the blocks, make it more walkable, and that they're much narrower, lined with retail and boutiques with then offices and or residences above. And it is just killing it. They're putting in a second transit stop that it never had before. It's growing like mad. A project for competing for jobs, creative office. My Georgia Tech students, if they have to go work at an office park, this one they would like to. This one, they burned a cubicle at the groundbreaking. This is the anti-corporate, mixed-use innovation district called Taxi because it was a taxi distribution. It's where the taxis go to sleep at night, get repaired, and the radio tower calls them in. It's now half housing, half office, just all creative. It's all about just sort of authentic recycled materials. Every single unit comes with the glass sliding door. They kept a lot of the parking, but they even repainted some of the striping, but also inserted all sorts of some of the first real green infrastructure projects in Denver. It's attracted all the kind of next generation entrepreneurs. The only slide, I showed 2 slides because it's so photogenic. The big amenity is a swimming pool made of shipping containers. They're right next to the rail yard. And their one cafe on site is a heritage food incubator, Peruvian on Mondays, Indonesian on Tuesday. And they built 4-bedroom apartments, 3s and 4s for families. I mean, just kind of always going counter to the grain of what everyone else is doing. Really a lot, I think, to learn from this project. Okay, last challenge, adding water and energy resilience. I know you guys don't really have quite as many streams and creeks, but you're an arid. But this just makes me cry. Philadelphia historic streams before and after suburbanization. And we wonder, why does it flood now? It's, yes, climate change. It's also because the water doesn't have anywhere else to go. We've paved it all over. And the pipes are old and failing. Lots of different strategies for energy, for water, too much water, too little water. I'm not going to go through them all. You guys know way more than I do about really adding resilience to fires, being fire adapted, staying out of the wildland-urban interface, the WUI. Always love saying that. And just, we do know how to make buildings fireproof. We actually, but doesn't mean we should make them. We need to make them so that they add to the urbanism. We are still seeing, I think, some amazing projects. This is David Baker and Associates doing affordable housing with Mid-Penn Housing in Sunnyvale, where it's California's first all-electric affordable housing project. The solar array covers 100% of the common loads and 46% of the building's total loads, doing some great things with green infrastructure to repair at least some of the ecology on site, and doing all that in an extremely expensive housing market that it was a former one-story commercial building, but is now, being able to do this with much-needed affordable housing. So this one in Austin, the third Austin project, another Zoom town. I thought it might be relevant. Maybe not. But this is Miller, and this is kind of pushing it on the retrofit. It's the retrofit of a former airport. So it's a lot of parking, a lot of asphalt, but not your typical suburban condition. This is 700 acres, publicly owned, with a requirement now for 35% of the housing to be affordable. It's a very green community. They've got combined cooling, heating, and power plants. All the homes are solar ready, and they have their own solar microgrid. And houses aren't allowed to have more than not even this much of a lawn. But they have shared greens that are irrigated with recycled city water. But it's really interesting, I think, how they've both integrated the sustainability and the affordability by making the lots super small, a wide variety of housing types. So they've kept things really small, reducing the land and water bills, but then have these large shared and public spaces. They've reduced heat gain by requiring porches and street trees, minimized western frontage, and then they have a really great shared equity program that I'd love to see more projects use real estate transaction fees. It just says that in perpetuity, every time a property sells, 0.25% of that cost goes into a fund that then funds no interest second mortgage that keeps the affordable homes in the program. Austin has had such an escalation in prices. What that's resulted in is they do have 35% affordable, and then the rest is super high expensive, and it's the middle class that just can't afford anything. It's still locking people out. We haven't figured out all of this stuff, but the real estate transaction fees can be used for anything. They can be used to support arts, education, in this case, affordable housing. So that brings us to the CFAs. So your climate-friendly areas, the Costco site, just how you guys can begin to maybe apply some of the ideas that I've shared to some of these sites. I mean, strip malls are a darn good place to start. Greater Boston did a study of all of their strip malls and found that if just 10% of their strip malls and just the ones that were near transit were redeveloped with mixed-use, multifamily housing, they could meet the demand for 2030 and raise nearly $6 million in tax revenue. Going even further, Professor Chris Nelson at ASU has argued that if just 25% of the strip malls in the country were redeveloped with two-story residential, maybe on top of the existing, but just two-story residential, we could meet the entire country's housing needs for the next 50 years. So it doesn't have to be tall and dense to still make a big difference. So what can you do? Number one, support Bend in leveraging your CFAs to address not only climate, but all of the challenges. You kind of noticed that I'd be pointing out a project and it's doing one thing, but it's also doing some green infrastructure, also doing some affordability, also doing all sorts of things. I don't know if you noticed all the little blue stars are where there's senior housing integrated in. Number two, garner broad community input and co-determine opportunities for redevelopment, re-inhabitation, and regreening, especially on publicly owned land. Three, establish more economic improvement districts. In different parts of the country, they're called different things. In Georgia, in Atlanta, in Georgia, they're called community improvement districts, where businesses are agree to self-tax to fund improvements that they don't feel the city or state are adequately providing. In Atlanta, that is what's driving all of the suburban retrofitting. And they're building major infrastructure, new bridges, new street connections, new sidewalk systems. So use your economic improvement districts and see if you can. Tax increment financing districts, and hire a public-private partnership manager at the city level. 95% of the retrofits, certainly the redevelopments, the big ones, they're all public-private partnerships, and they require a significant staff person with the experience to negotiate those partnerships on behalf of the city. I grew up in New Jersey. I'm a Jersey girl. Most suburban state in the nation. Try to name a great city. Bet you can't. I thought I would find so many retrofits in New Jersey. No, our established system of governance is really small boroughs and townships nested in counties. They all fight with each other. None of them have a big enough planning staff. And so where I see the really big developments are in the communities with seriously staffed planning departments. Improve connectivity of street networks and ecosystems, diversify housing choices for all, rely less on retail to activate public space. Retail is shrinking in almost everywhere. I mean, it's competing, and so just smaller size footprints. You're going to want to cluster it certainly. Strategically to help the retailers really survive where they can. Instead, try to activate public space by integrating social infrastructure, town greens, daycare, senior care, libraries, all of those other kinds of things. Lastly, and most importantly, if you remember nothing else from this lecture, rewrite your regulations to both make it easier to produce urban form, which your regulations, oh yeah, you guys are on good track for that, but you don't have the second part. You have to also make it harder to build suburban form. So there's a two-part change in the regulations. And with that, thank you very much.
Wow, I think that was at least 1,000 case studies, right? No, maybe 50. I'm just so amazed at all the intricate details that you remember from each case study. Give another round of applause for Ellen. Thank you so much. So we have about 15 minutes for Q&A, if anyone is ready to go. Okay, we got Ryan in the back. I think we need the other mic. Nicole's on it.
And I'm sorry I went too long. I wanted more time for Q&A. I always rush at the end.
Well, thank you for being here, and thank you for the wealth of information. At the very beginning, you had mentioned the age of infrastructure and talking about densifying development and so on. To me, that sounds like massive infrastructure development project. No? Okay.
No.
How does that happen? Who pays for it? How is that coordinated with developments, so on?
So low density development, that requires massive. You've got to extend streets and pipes, long distances for a handful of homes or shops or whatever. But so once you go more densely, yes, you need infrastructure, but you don't need on a per unit basis way less. It still is massive, but what's also really great is once you start really getting into using the more sustainable systems, you start recycling your water, you don't need as wide a pipe. You're making things more walkable so that you don't have to provide as much parking, you don't have to build as much. You start being able to actually reduce the per unit material.
What we currently have is an infrastructure that can barely sustain single-family detached homes, but we have a planning department and laws at state level that are allowing us to build quads on all of those.
To build what's on those?
Quadplex.
Okay. Uh-huh.
But in order to be able to do that, you have to go from the existing 4-inch line to a 6-inch line. So that cost is substantial. So, I mean, I'm assuming you've run across similar sorts of things. So that's more where
I get you. Yeah. No, definitely. That's where, the missing the infill stuff you're going to run into places where you got to try to make that quad as sustainable as you can, but you will run into some of that. And, hey, you are getting more tax revenue from that. So there are things that the city should be supplying. Different localities have very different rules about who pays for it. I couldn't tell you how it works here. But there's definitely more revenue coming in. And usually it's whoever's getting more revenue is going to be the one who should be paying for it. In general, I feel really strongly that we want our infrastructure to be publicly owned. Not necessarily once a pipe crosses over into the private land. No, that's your infrastructure, not our. But anything that is collective, streets, wires, if you are putting in a new street grid onto a dead mall site or strip mall site, I think that should be paid for by the public. Those are streets. And 99% of the time, that is what happens. There are some occasions where actually the developer will say, I don't want the city owning the street because the city will insist that I post the street speed, what I think is too fast for the kind of small block infrastructure that I'm setting up. So sometimes you'll see folks holding on to the owning the streets, but in general, where public space infrastructure, anything in the public realm should be publicly paid for. And bonding is the usual vehicle for that, and that has usually worked out very well. Bond market's kind of weird right now, but.
Other questions? I think somebody's going to bring a mic over. Let's maybe do this gentleman up here first.
Hi, Robert Anderson. You showed a lot of really good, new urbanism examples, which tend to be dropping mixed use and residential into old, redone commercial areas. And what I'm wondering is does your program look at this sort of opposite of that, which is to say, if you look at Bend, 80% of Bend is suburban, one-story, it's there. The infrastructure is there. It's already sort of filled in. And so another approach to retrofitting suburbia is the bodega approach, where you basically say small pockets of commercial, I'm going to spread out in the existing single-family area, and I'm going to have a certain density for grocery retail, I'm going to have a certain density for bicycle shops, I'm going to have a certain density for libraries, et cetera. But just 2 and 3 lots, say, converted. Do you have anybody looking at that problem?
There are a few examples, but it's really rare. So I'm always looking for those. Nashville, Tennessee, actually East Nashville specifically, has terrific little 2-3 lots at a corner, sometimes 2 corners opposing, whatever, that is literally incubator retail, little tiny cottage. Essentially, it's a cottage courts, but it's retail, and some of them are little more office. But they have a bunch of those that just fit into the neighborhood and expand, give the neighborhood more stuff. They're not exactly the everyday retail that you think like, oh, I'm going to go buy my milk from. No. But they are providing, I think, just that a great diversity into the neighborhood of opportunities. We passed one street here earlier today.
The active culture site.
Yeah. And I was asking, what were the circumstances?
In Galveston, yeah.
Galveston, yeah. What were the circumstances for converting the zoning of these existing single-family homes to become residential? Because most neighborhoods will absolutely not over my dead body. Will you allow that? The fact that you have one here that is quite charming, and I imagine most of the neighborhood sees it as an asset, means you could probably duplicate that, and I definitely want more information on that one. But it is very rare. The kinds of retrofits I see in the residential neighborhoods, there's a really great program, but I just don't think it's as applicable here. But in Minnesota, in Maplewood, when it comes time to resurface any residential street, at that time, they narrow the street, put in rain gardens, and if it doesn't have a sidewalk, put in sidewalks. And that just is something that it's just staggered out as whenever it's time for the restriping. And they've dramatically reduced, the rain gardens work fantastically at keeping out toxins, and it's improved water quality in Minnesota, land of lakes.
Great, thank you.
I think we had a couple questions in here.
Thank you. I don't really have a question. Well, it is a question. Have you toured Northwest Crossing since you've been here?
Yes.
What are your thoughts on that?
It really looked very interesting and great. I wish it was more affordable. But that's true of most of Bend. But yeah. No, I thought very nicely done.
Is there, or do you have a standard definition for affordable housing?
So the standard, it literally comes from a nursery rhyme in England that said, you should not, affordable housing is paying up to not exceeding 30% of your income. And that is just generally accepted, even though it's not generally lived. And then there's a whole set of tiers. You talk about what percent of the average median income and how you draw the boundaries of what you're considering your median income. That game gets very...
This is an awesome talk. Thank you so much for sharing all those examples. I am wondering about the role of authenticity or personality, or kind of, if in your case studies, something that could only be built in that particular town and not a town in a different state, and does that lead to greater success of those kinds of areas, or is it not as important?
So it's interesting. If you look at marketers, they will, Claritas divides the U.S. into something like 73 different sub-market, depending on what magazines you subscribe to, your income, where you went to school, blah, 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 blah. They've got you pegged. The biggest group are that the developers pay attention to are the unibox retirees, which means the unibox meaning it's one of those shades of beige, and that's what sells the most in most parts of the country. Every year in Las Vegas at the Home Builders Show, the most attended session is where someone who studies the markets will say, this is the plan of house that sold the most units last year, and guaranteed next year across the country, you're going to have about 65 to 70% of all homes built, that plan. That's how our production home building system works. And there are also a lot of people who absolutely hate the unibox. But there are a lot of people that's what they know. They like that it's just like my house. My last house, everything will fit. So different strokes for different folks. I think part of what a community wants to establish is pride and in those unique aspects. But it's really hard to regulate. I'm not a fan of design review boards and design local standards that tends to make it just sort of cookie cutter of whatever is there. And everyone's got kind of different tastes, but I think it's hire really great architects who just do great work and have them come and, it helps to just go local. The most authentic things will always be the things that are local, that respond to the local climate, respond to the local materials, and have some authenticity. To my thinking, the project Rhino, Taxi in Rhino, to me has this feeling of a terrific sense of authenticity. Is it what everyone would like? No, but it's what my younger students like.
We don't have any local architects in the room, do we? I think we had a question in the back earlier. Okay, we'll go to this one first, and then we'll go to you, Jay.
Hi. What Bend is really known for is nature and its ecosystems, but it also has fire issues. And I do landscaping and design, and what I have found is that I just love what you're doing and all the urban spaces, but I feel like one thing we really need here is we really need a way to integrate our natural landscapes with our urban areas and all the trails, and we've done some of that, but we also have, it's not just about the urbans, it's about all the wildlife and the pollinators, and so many times we want to just isolate the urban areas, and we're infilling all of the trees and parks and every little corner with a house or something. And so what are your thoughts on the best way to integrate those natural ecosystems that are fire prone with the urban areas?
I mean, in terms of the fire prone, I really wish I had a silver bullet, and I don't. But I think that what I teach my students when I first give them a site is to draw the urban framework that connects the natural systems and the big moves of the man-made systems. And it's sort of, you draw one, then you draw the other. So it's networking the green spaces so that they interconnect for the habitat and pollinators and all of that, and then and that it is absolutely integrated in to the urban framework of the man-made stuff. So the two have to come together, and I do feel like it's really quite remarkable how much we've seen. Some of our denser cities in Asia have seen biodiversity increases through the ways that they have really integrated fantastic parks and even green buildings and in places with really lush climates and stuff.
I guess I need to speak into this. So you gave some great examples of urban infill development, which were absolutely wonderful. I've actually experienced many of them personally, and were absolutely great, as I just said. What you were alluding to, though, is really about taking the Costco site and figuring out how to redevelop it to be something that's an amenity and a contribution to our community. However, all that relied on something which I would say is transit-oriented development. So it relies on having many different things involved in it, including the City of Bend and other development corporations involved. So my question to you is, who takes the lead on that, and how does that work? How do you see that working? Because obviously you can't just take Costco or this large site, create a beautiful development without the help of the city and without it being integrated correctly within the current urban fabric.
It's a great question, and there's not one right answer. The more I look at all these retrofits, I just see so many different ways that cities and private owners, private potential new owners negotiate all of this. But I would say that, 15 years ago, it was mostly the private sector that was taking the lead, where, once the city had at least changed the zoning. If the city changed the zoning, that was as much as the city would do, and then it was kind of up to the private sector. Lately, I would say there's been a very significant, over the last 5 years, of cities themselves buying a key parcel that they see as setting the stage and saying, this parcel has to be done right, and if this one gets it right, the rest will follow. And it's really rather, I've had a lot of folks in the industry kind of tell me, no, cities and sometimes as master developers. Westminster, Colorado, when their mall died, they interviewed a whole lot of firms. They put out an RFP, they got a whole bunch of developers, and they didn't like a single thing of what the developers were proposing. So then they said, okay, we're going to do this ourselves. And they are the master developer. I'm seeing that variations of that happening a lot more lately. And I think cities are just beginning to feel, they know that the developer, especially right now, construction costs are so high. Everybody, inflation, worried about kind of where the uncertainties. Cities are leveraging their bonding ability that much more. They know what they want, and if they don't, they just see developers not saying, well, yeah, we want to do the walkable thing, but first we're going to put in this. And they're like, no. The cities are saying no. So that, in some places, that is what, I don't know if that is what Bend should be doing. I'm just saying I'm seeing that as a trend. in kind of leading examples. Westminster. So I'll put in a little plug. I did not set out to become a podcaster in life, but a wealthy Georgia Tech donor called me up 7 years ago, said, Ellen, my wife and I are really getting into podcasts. We want you to do one on cities. We'll pay for it, and we want to support a bunch of students. They're paying 7 of my students' tuition, so I became a podcaster. Good enough deal. And so one of the podcasts that we just recorded about a month ago, it's not yet up on the website, but is with the current mayor of Westminster, Colorado. Was trained as an architect and then a planner, and she's a planner for a nearby town. But she's been in charge from the public sector side of the redevelopment of the Westminster Mall into now downtown Westminster. And then in conversation with Neil Payton of Torty Gallis, who is the master planner. And their conversation is very revealing about, if you're interested in learning more about that. So if you just Google redesigning cities, Georgia Tech, you get to the website, and it will be posted as soon as my grad students finish the edits. They're a little slow.
Okay, I think we have time for one. Oh, okay, we got to cut off the questions. I got the final no-go. Okay, well, thank you all so much. And thank you, Ellen, for all of your wisdom and knowledge.